The storm rolled in quickly dark clouds swallowing up the sun, and Mary could feel her heart race as the wind howled around her. She stood by her wagon, the wheels deep in the mud of the trail, gripping the side with white knuckles. Just ahead she could see the trees bending, branches snapping like twigs under the force of the gusts. With a surge of panic, she looked at the horizon. She had been on this journey for days, seeking a new life far from the struggles of her past. But now everything seemed to crumble around her. Mary took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She focused on her daughter, Lucy, tucked safely in the back, her small frame secure in the blankets. She called to Lucy, her voice steady, though her insides churned. The wind howled, shifting the wagon precariously. To Mary, it felt like the earth was shaking beneath her feet. The wagons were supposed to be sturdy, but this tempest was fierce. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind grabbed the wagon, pulling it sideways. Mary nearly stumbled as she reached for it, but it was too late. With a jolt, the wagon broke free, the wheels slipping on the wet ground, and it rolled down the muddy trail. She shouted, desperation clawing at her throat. There was no time to think. She sprinted after it, her heart pounding, the rain starting to pour down in heavy droplets. As she chased the wagon, her thoughts darted to Lucy. Was her daughter safe? Would the wagon tumble off the trail down the hillside, lost forever? Just as she reached the edge of the muddy path, she felt a strong presence beside her. It was David. He had been camped a few yards back and had seen the entire ordeal unfold. His face was set, eyes determined. He shouted over the wind. Without hesitation, David leaped onto his horse. The animal seemed to sense the urgency, stamping its hooves, eager to run. Mary heard him shout as he rode down the trail, pushing through the storm. Mary watched, heart aching as David rode hard, the rain drenching him instantly, but he showed no sign of backing down. She knew the forest ahead twisted like a maze, and the ground was treacherous. Each turn could hide danger, but David's spirit lit up the dark sky. She was torn. Should she stay with Lucy or follow him? Her heart screamed to stay, but the logical side whispered that she could not let Lucy be in danger alone. Then fear gripped her so tight she could hardly breathe. What if the wagon tipped? What if David didn't find it in time? Stay here, honey, she whispered to Lucy. With a resolve made of steel, she ran after David, determined to catch up with him. It was hard to make out through the sheets of rain, but she pushed herself onward, each step heavier than the last as fatigue began to set in. She had always been independent, fighting for her family, but now she felt small against nature's fury. As she climbed the muddy slope, she thought of the life they were trying to build, a life far from hardship. It fueled her determination. David would not face this storm alone, not while she still had breath in her body. In the distance, she spotted a flash of movement, the wagon. It was stuck between two large rocks at the edge of a small ravine, swaying precariously, but it hadn't tipped over yet. Relief washed over her, although it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of panic. With the wind howling and the rain pounding, she knew they needed to act fast. She shouted, her voice lost in the storm. But the wind stole her words. She felt like shouting into a void, and the thought gripped her harder than the storm itself. Then, just as she reached the edge of the ravine, she spotted David coming back into view. He had maneuvered his horse around the fallen branches, doing everything to reach the wagon before any real damage could be done. His expression was grim, but there was fire in his eyes. He wouldn't give up. He called out, urgency lacing his voice. We need to secure it. He pointed to the frayed line hanging off the side of the wagon, flapping wildly in the wind. Without hesitation, she rushed over, adrenaline surging through her veins. Mary seized the rope, her fingers barely able to grip it as she fought against the rain. She tied it tightly to the wagon, praying it would hold. David shouted as he positioned the horse nearby. There was no second to lose. They would work together as one, just like they had so many times before. They pulled with all their strength. The wind whipped around them, but they didn't relent. For every inch the wagon shifted, there was that moment of fear when it felt as if they might lose it all again. With one final effort, they pulled the wagon back onto firm ground. Mary could feel her muscles screaming, but the joy surged through her as she looked at David, breathless and wild-eyed. She gasped, the storm's fury losing its grip momentarily. Then they heard a soft whimper from the rear of the wagon. Both of them jumped as they sprinted around the side. There, sheltered under the blankets, was Lucy, her little frame shaking with fright but unharmed. Mary knelt down, wrapping her arms around her daughter with a warm rush of relief. Lucy, I'm here, baby. She held her close, feeling the storm raging outside fade into the background for just a moment. David exhaled sharply, relief washing over his face. His voice, though tired, was filled with shared gratitude. As they all huddled together under the makeshift shelter of the wagon, Mary's heart beat steadily again, though the rain continued to pour relentlessly. We need to secure everything, she murmured, pulling away to check the wagon's contents, rattled but intact. David joined her, his hands skillfully fastening things down. Their movements reflected trust. They leaned into one another, finding strength in their partnership. As the storm raged, they battled against it together, fighting not just for survival, but for a bright future. Outside, the world clawed at them with the wind, but inside was warmth. As a family, they felt a bond that the storm could never break. Mary looked at them, her heart swelling. She thought of all the challenges ahead, but somehow they felt lighter now. The night sky deepened, and though the storm threatened to tear them apart, they stood strong against it. In that moment, they knew they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, united by hope and courage. David nodded, and for the first time through the storm, they felt the flicker of a shared dream burning brighter. As the rain poured and the wind howled, they came to understand that storms may come, but they will always have each other. Together, they would ride through the darkness into whatever light awaited them beyond. The storm hit with a ferocity that turned the world upside down. Wind whipped through the trees, and the first crack of thunder echoed like a warning siren. Mary clutched the side of her wagon, feeling the wheels sink deeper into the mud of the trail. Just ahead, her daughter Lucy peered out from under the canvas cover, eyes wide with fear. Mary's heart raced as she watched the skies darken, knowing that all they had fought for could be lost in an instant. Then, as if the storm had a mind of its own, a powerful gust of wind surged through the valley. The wagon lurched violently, twisting to the side. Mary's breath caught in her throat. "No," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out in the tempest. In a blink, the wagon slipped from the muddy path, wheels spinning futilely, and shot down the slope toward the trees. Mary launched after it, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She screamed, panic flooding her mind, all her fears coiled tighter, a knot in her stomach, and then just beyond the chaos she saw him. David camped not far away, eyes wide with urgency. His horse was already restless, sensing the looming danger. David jumped into action, kicking his horse into gear, galloping after the wagon that seemed destined to crash. "Hold on, Lucy," David shouted, courage pushing him through the storm. In that moment, Mary remembered all the times he'd been there, standing by her side. His determination was like a lifeline in the dark. Mary's feet pounded the ground, mud splattering on her legs as she sprinted alongside them. Each step felt heavy, her heart aching with fear for Lucy. What if the wagon couldn't be stopped? What if the storm claimed everything they had worked for? But David was relentless. He pursued the wagon, eyes locked on its path like a hawk hunting prey. His hands gripped the reins tightly, muscles straining as he urged the horse to go faster. Mary could see that fierce spark in his eyes, the same tenacity that had drawn her to him all those months ago. As they rounded a bend, the wagon hit a bump and tilted, teetering on the edge of disaster. He gestured wildly as he approached, and Mary's heart skipped. Without thinking, she dove for the frayed rope trailing from the side of the wagon. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with her rising dread, and she struggled to tie it off while simultaneously running. She could barely see through the sheets of water, but she tied the knot with desperate precision, a primal urge driving her. David pulled his horse closer, reaching out to grab the thong. He barked, his voice cutting through the storm. They shared a glance, understanding passing between them in that charged moment. Together, they could face anything. They yanked with all their strength, the wagon groaned, wheels grinding against the soaked earth. For a heartbeat, it felt like time froze in that swirl of chaos, each of them pushing past their limits. Finally, with one powerful tug, they pulled the wagon back onto the path, its wheels settling with a soft thud. Mary gasped for breath, heart pounding like war drums in her chest. She turned to David, a mix of relief and trembling fear washing over her. But the storm didn't relent. Rain lashed down, the wind screaming like 1,000 voices. The trees around them swayed violently, an angry symphony of nature. Just then, a deafening crash split the air. A massive branch fell nearby, crashing down where they had just stood. Mary's breath hitched. She cried, urgency spilling out of her. They couldn't stay exposed like this, not with nature raging around them. David nodded, and they raced to secure the wagon. As they worked, Mary's thoughts raced. She glanced back at Lucy, still hidden under the blankets but safe. That thought fueled her, a fire igniting inside. They had to protect their family. They had to get through this together. David and Mary fastened everything down, every rope and tarp, as rain soaked their clothes and chilled their bones. With every raindrop, she thought of the life they had dreamed of, the fresh start lying ahead. It was worth every struggle, every challenge. Finally, when the chaos settled just enough to breathe, David stepped close, his eyes searching hers. "Mary, we need to find shelter." His voice was steady, yet Mary could see the exhaustion in his stance. "Agreed," she replied, nodding, "but we can't leave Lucy." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. There was no debate in his tone. In that moment, she understood. He wouldn't leave her side no matter what. They were in this together, through the storm and beyond. They gathered Lucy, pulling her from the wagon, blankets wrapped tightly around her small form. She was shivering, but her wide eyes held a flicker of bravery, a spark that ignited Mary's own courage. "Okay, Mama," Lucy whispered, trying to comfort her, almost like the roles were reversed. With Lucy nestled securely between them, the trio pressed forward, moving into the thickening trees. The canopy offered some protection, but the wind howled like a predator, darting through the branches. Mary's mind raced. She kept glancing back at the wagon, worried it might slip away again, but there was nothing she could do. The storm raged, branches snapping around them, crumbling like the foundation of her hopes. David shouted, pointing to a rise in the terrain. It was a small cave, barely visible through the chaos. They made their way toward it, and Mary felt a desperate hope bloom inside her as they approached. As they ducked inside, the sound of the storm transformed into a dull roar. The darkness wrapped around them, and for a moment the fear lessened. They huddled inside, catching their breath. Lucy clung to Mary, her eyes still wide but relaxing slightly, safe for now. "We can't stay long," David said, scanning the cave walls. His voice, steady and sure, wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "We need to check on the wagon," Mary said, but David cut her off gently. "Let me go," he insisted. "I'll move fast." His unwavering confidence was calming even as the storm raged outside. She knew he would face anything for them. With a quick glance at Lucy, who had started to drift off into a restless sleep, Mary nodded. "Be careful," she whispered, the words wrapping around her heart like a fragile thread. David slipped back into the storm, disappearing into the relentless chaos. Mary kept her breath steady, holding Lucy close, feeling her daughter's warmth against her. As she stared into the darkness of the cave, time stretched, filled with the sounds of thunder crashing angrily against the world outside. Minutes felt like hours. Mary listened intently, half expecting the sound of David returning at any moment, half dreading what might happen if he didn't. Her mind raced with all of the what-ifs. What if the wagon had rolled too far? What if the storm claimed them all? Fear knotted in her chest, but deep down she clung to hope. Together they had pulled the wagon from the edge. Together they had faced the storm thus far. Trust was all she had left. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, David reappeared, drenched but alive. "Still there," he said, breathless with relief. "Secure." Mary nodded, a surge of gratitude washing over her. He stepped back into the cave, warmth radiating from him despite his soaked clothes. "The storm is changing," he continued. "Then let's go," Mary replied, standing tall. She felt a newfound strength as they prepared to leave the shelter of the cave. Together they would ride against the storm, not just as survivors, but as a team bound by love and determination. With Lucy still nestled between them, they braved the wind and rain once more. Each step felt monumental, but they pushed on. The world around them roared like a wild animal, but they would not be conquered. As they reached the top of the ridge, the storm began to shift. The wind howled, ripping branches from trees, but amid that fury, they spotted a small farmhouse in the distance, a beacon of hope against the dark sky. David pointed, and Mary's heart soared. She urged, pushing forward with everything she had left. They struggled against the storm, but every step brought them closer to safety, closer to warmth beside the fire. At last, they ran toward the farmhouse, shoving the door open against the howling wind. They stumbled inside, panting and soaked but alive, the warmth of the hearth blazing before them. The cozy room felt like a dream, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Lucy blinked, eyes wide, but now her small face held a grin. She exclaimed, wrapping her arms tightly around Mary's waist. Mary knelt down, hugging her fiercely, tears streaming freely, though this time they were tears of relief. "We did, sweetheart." David came beside them, his chest rising and falling heavily. He seemed to be taking in the room, the warmth embracing them like a long-lost friend. "We're safe," he said softly, resting a hand on Mary's shoulder. Yes, they were safe. The storm may have raged and threatened everything they held dear, but they had fought through it. They had each other, and that was a power stronger than any storm could unleash. Mary looked at David, their eyes locking in a moment that felt timeless. They were unbreakable together, and as Lucy nestled close, laughter bubbled up in Mary's chest despite the storm still raging outside. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them together, guided by courage, love, and the strength of their journey through the storm. The wind howled like a wild animal, ripping through the valley with an unrelenting force. Mary stood frozen, heart thundering in her chest, eyes wide in disbelief. Just moments ago, everything seemed fine. Her wagon, sturdy and filled with precious supplies, had been their lifeline on this treacherous journey. Now, as the first raindrops began to fall, they were lost in a symphony of chaos. Then, like a nightmare unfolding, a sudden blast of wind surged beneath the wagon, jolting it free from the muddy path. Mary gasped as she watched, horror-struck, as the wheels spun crazily and the wagon careened down the slope. "No," she cried out, desperation gripping her voice. Lucy, her young daughter, peeked out from beneath the canvas cover, her small face pale with fear. She whimpered. Mary shouted, her voice cracking. The storm was just beginning, and she knew they had to act. With every ounce of strength, she ripped her gaze from Lucy and sprinted after the runaway wagon, mud splattering beneath her feet. But she wasn't alone. From the edge of the campsite, David, a fellow traveler, was already gathering his horse, eyes sharp with determination. He had been watching them from a distance as the storm unfolded, his instincts kicking in as he realized the urgency of the situation. Without a second thought, he mounted his horse, the powerful beast snorting in response to the tension around them. He shouted over the rising winds, "I'll get it." Every heartbeat felt like a drum in her ears as she pushed herself harder, fueled by fear and adrenaline. But no matter how fast she ran, it felt like the storm was working against her. The rain began to pour down in sheets, soaking her clothes and blurring her vision. Mary could see David speeding toward the wagon, but would he reach it in time? "Please, God," she whispered, her breath hitching in her throat as she pressed onward. The wagon tipped again, threatening to spill its contents into the raging ground below. She shouted, a spiral of panic gripping her heart. All the supplies inside were meant to create their new life, a life filled with hope far from the memories of struggle. With every ounce of will, she forced herself to focus. They couldn't lose it now. David barreled down the slope, his horse leaping over branches and rocks, determination etched into every line of his face. He reached the wagon just as it hit a bump, the wheels jerking sideways, and for a terrifying moment it felt like everything would unravel. He yelled, his voice full of grit and resolve. At that moment, time seemed to stretch. Mary felt her heart race in tandem with the chaos around them. David leapt from his horse, grasping the side of the wagon as it teetered. He shouted, pointing to the frayed line trailing off the side. Without thinking, Mary lunged forward, fear giving her strength. With shaking hands, she seized the rope, fastening it with every ounce of energy she had left. David called, urgency pouring from him. 1, 2, they yanked together, pulling with every muscle, heart racing in sync. The wheels of the wagon groaned against the mud, and just as hope seemed to glimmer, another gust of wind tore through, threatening to topple them both. Mary gritted her teeth, fear and desperation surging through her. They pulled again, adrenaline carrying them over what seemed like insurmountable odds. Finally, they managed to lunge the wagon back onto the path, its wheels clicking back into place with a triumphant thud. Breathing heavily, Mary met David's eyes, relief flooding her system. She gasped, tears mixing with the rain, but before they could hold on to that moment, the storm snarled around them, reminding them they weren't out of danger yet. The sky darkened further, clouds swelling ominously like a beast ready to strike. David's voice sliced through her thoughts. They didn't have time to waste. With Lucy still safe in the back of the wagon, Mary nodded firmly, understanding that every second counted. They quickly secured everything down, glancing at one another with urgent intensity. Mary could see the determination in David's eyes, the way he radiated calm despite the storm raging around them. "Follow my lead," he commanded, leading the way as they pressed forward, the storm still howling. The wind stung at their skin, and despite the adrenaline, fear gnawed at Mary's heart. Each crack of thunder sounded like a warning, get out or be swept away. Mary's mind whirled with anxiety as they reached a split in the trail. She called out, scanning the surroundings. The forest was dense and disorienting, shadows creeping in like ghosts. David shouted, urgency sharpening his voice. "We need to find higher ground." They veered left, pushing through the thick foliage, bracing against the unyielding wind. Each step felt monumental as they fought against nature's wrath. Lucy nestled against her mother, still frightened but trying to be brave. Mary wrapped her arms around her daughter. This was not just about survival, this was about their future. As they ascended toward the foothills, the world around them began to change. The trees stood like sentinels against the storm, and with every step they could feel the tension in the air. They were not just facing a storm, they were confronting every fear and challenge that had brought them to this point. Each raindrop felt like a reminder of the struggles they'd endured thus far. "Keep going," David yelled, breaking the silence, eyes focused ahead. His energy was infectious, feeding Mary's resolve. They could do this, they could overcome anything as long as they stuck together. Just as they reached a rise above the treetops, Mary spotted a clearing ahead. A small cabin, worn but standing strong against the storm, was perched against the rocky slope. Her heart leapt with hope. She shouted, pointing excitedly. David nodded, urgency shining in his eyes. He spurred the horse forward, Mary with Lucy close behind, each step a race against time. But as they broke into the clearing, a deafening crack of lightning struck the ground nearby, illuminating the cabin for just a heartbeat. The sound was explosive, a visceral reminder of nature's wrath. Mary flinched, adrenaline flooding her system. Air felt electric, and they rushed toward the cabin, hearts pounding. When they reached the cabin door, David threw it open and they stumbled inside, lungs burning from exertion. The interior felt alive with warmth, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. There was furniture, blankets, and even a flickering fireplace that seemed to beckon them nearer. "Thank God," Mary murmured, pulling Lucy close. They couldn't breathe easy just yet. The storm was still snarling outside, but at least they were safe for now. David closed the door behind them, leaning against it with a heavy sigh. "We need to secure this place," he said, rushing to the windows. Mary set Lucy down on a worn couch, gently brushing the hair from her daughter's face. "You did so well, my love," she whispered, kissing Lucy's forehead. The little girl smiled weakly, but fear still lingered in her eyes. She asked, voice trembling. "I hope so," Mary replied, though she wasn't sure, "but we're safe here." She wanted to shield her, to envelop her in warmth and love. David's movements were sharp and decisive as he worked, a calming presence in the storm raging beyond the walls. In that moment of quiet, as Mary watched David, she felt a swell of gratitude. Here was a man who didn't hesitate, who stood by her side through the chaos. They had come to this place as strangers, but now they were bound by shared fears and fierce hope. As the storm howled outside, they secured the windows together, working in harmony, their breaths fogging in the chilly air. And for every storm that threatened to rip them apart, each little victory brought them closer. After they finished securing the cabin, David stepped away, brushing his hands together. "We should check the supplies," he said, his voice steadying the tremors of uncertainty. Mary nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She immediately began to check the provisions they had shoved into the wagon, now safe within the cabin walls. They were limited but sufficient for the time being, and that was a relief. David asked, pulling out a lantern and lighting it with steadiness. Mary glanced over her shoulder, meeting his gaze filled with focus and determination. "We need to stick together, protect each other." David grinned, the tension easing for a moment. Agreed. Their hands met briefly, fingers brushing together in an unspoken promise. It was a bond strengthened by storms, trials, and the knowledge that together they could weather anything. As the rain continued to lash against the cabin, each drop a reminder of the battle waging outside, they settled down on the worn couch with Lucy nestled between them. The flickering light illuminated their faces, warming them against the chill of the storm. "Tell me a story, Mama," Lucy said, her small voice breaking the tension. Mary smiled, feeling the warmth of familial love wrap around them. "All right, sweetheart." And as Mary spun the tale, weaving words of adventure and courage, she could see the fear slowly ebbing from Lucy's face. David leaned closer, enchanted by the story, and in that moment the storm outside faded into background noise. They could face whatever came next, no matter how fierce the winds grew or how loud the thunder crashed. As long as they had each other, they would be all right. Hours passed and the storm finally began to fade, but within that cabin, something new blossomed, their shared strength, their unity, and a bond that felt unbreakable. And as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, signaling the end of the tempest outside, Mary knew that they had emerged from the dark, more alive than ever before. They would continue their journey undeterred and ready to forge ahead, hand in hand, no storm strong enough to tear them apart. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, momentarily brightening a world shrouded in darkness. Mary gasped as the noise of the storm rolled in like an angry beast, its ferocity catching her off guard. She clutched her daughter Lucy's hand, fear gripping her heart. The earth beneath them felt alive, trembling with every crack of thunder. Just moments earlier, they had been moving along a quiet trail, the sun shining gently upon them. But now it felt as if the heavens had opened, unleashing chaos. The wind howled, pulling at the wagon's canvas top, and Mary felt helpless as the first raindrops broke against her skin. She shouted over the din, her protective instincts kicking in. She could barely hear herself, but she could sense her daughter's fear, could see it reflected in Lucy's wide eyes. With a sudden gust, the wagon lurched violently. Mary's heart dropped. The weight of their belongings, everything they had, clothes, food, cherished keepsakes, seemed to shift as danger loomed closer. "No," she cried, desperately pulling the reins, but the storm didn't care. Another powerful gust swept through, sending the wagon careening off the trail and down a muddy slope. Mary's heart raced, panic surging through her. "Lucy," she twisted, desperately looking back at the wagon, her mind racing with the thought of losing everything they had fought for. Memories of their journey flooded her mind, a fresh start, dreams of a better life, the promise of hope. All of it was now teetering on the brink of disaster. From behind, a figure emerged, a silhouette against the storm. David. He had always been there, a fellow traveler who had shared many miles with them. Mary had seen the strength in him, the courage that radiated from his soul. As the wagon slipped from her grasp, she saw that same determination in his eyes. David shouted through the howling wind as he leapt onto his horse, a powerful steed harnessed with purpose. "I'll get it." With a primal instinct, Mary ran after the wagon, her feet slipping in the mud. "Please," she prayed silently as she pushed forward, not caring about her own safety. The storm roared, angry and relentless. David was already gaining ground. His horse galloped down the slope, hooves pounding against the earth. Mary could see the wagon spinning wildly, teetering on the edge of the ravine. Every fiber of her being begged for him to reach it in time. He shouted, his voice determined but calm. In that moment, Mary felt her heart swell with hope, even as dread loomed above her. David, with his unwavering spirit, was going to fight for them. As the wagon tipped dangerously, Mary pushed herself harder, muscles aching and breath coming in sharp bursts. She saw the wheels slide, gaining speed as they descended further, almost as if the storm itself had a mind to consume them. David cried, already at the wagon's side. For a second, Mary hesitated, but instinct guided her. She jumped to the edge of the slope, reaching for the frayed line hanging from the side of the wagon, and she grasped it tight. "Pull," David yelled, and they yanked at the same time. The wagon groaned, but it didn't budge. One more time. On three, they pulled with everything they had, desperation fueling their strength. Just as the wagon threatened to tumble over, they felt it shift, inches closer to safety. With a collective grunt, they pulled again, and the wagon slid back onto the path with a heavy thud. Breathing heavily, Mary stumbled back, gratefulness flooding her heart as she met David's fierce gaze. She gasped, but just as the relief washed over them, the storm howled louder, as if protesting their victory. "It's not over yet," David said, eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "We need to get to higher ground." Mary took Lucy's hand, her own trembling. Together they moved, their hearts racing with newfound urgency. The storm roared around them, branches snapping and rain lashing against their skin. As they climbed, the path ahead narrowed and twisted, the trees leaning dangerously close. The wind tried to buffet them off course, yet with each step, Mary steeled herself. She couldn't afford to lose her footing. Not now, David led the way, navigating the treacherous terrain with steady feet. With every step, Mary was reminded of their journey, the choices they had made, the hope they had kindled. Each drop of rain felt like a test of their resolve, but they weren't going to falter. Just as they emerged at a rocky ledge, the storm's fury intensified. A deafening crack of thunder shook the ground beneath them, and in that blinding flash, Lucy stumbled, letting out a frightened whimper. Mary reached out, catching her just before she fell. She held her tightly, feeling the small body tremble against her. David immediately rushed to her side. "It's okay, you're okay," he said softly, his voice a balm against the chaos. He crouched down, meeting Lucy's frightened gaze. "We're going to find shelter." Taking a deep breath, Mary nodded, squeezing Lucy's hand in reassurance. "We can do this." They pushed forward, heartbeats echoing the relentless rhythm of the storm. As they crested the ridge, the wind howled ragefully behind them, but ahead, through the sheets of rain, they spotted something broken but hopeful, a cabin that seemed to welcome them through the tempest. David shouted, pointing ahead. With renewed determination, they sprinted down the slope, dodging branches and puddles, each step a promise of safety. Mary felt her heart race faster than ever, the cabin now within reach. She called out. In one swift motion, David flung the door open and they tumbled inside, breathless and soaked. The cabin smelled of wood and earth, walls worn but sturdy against the storm. They stood in the warm glow of the flickering firelight, soaked to the bone but alive. Mary took a moment to catch her breath, her heart swelling as she looked at Lucy and David. "Just for now," David reminded, glancing back at the door, the storm still raging outside. Mary nodded, her mind spinning. "I'll check for supplies," she said, moving through the cluttered space. The cabin was small but contained enough a sturdy table, some blankets, and a few provisions left behind as though waiting for the right travelers. She shouted, pulling out a sack of dried beans, some nuts, and a few other essentials. "That'll hold us for a while," David agreed, lighting a couple of lanterns to help chase away the shadows. He moved with purpose, securing the windows against the storm. Lucy wandered closer, her small hands clutching a blanket, still visibly shaken from the whole ordeal. Mary knelt down and wrapped her arms around her daughter, feeling Lucy's heartbeat against her. "You're so brave, sweetheart," she whispered. In that tender moment, Lucy peeked up, eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you, Mama," she said softly, her fear beginning to fade, if only for a moment. The three of them huddled close together near the fireplace, and David's voice broke the silence. "It's going to be okay." Mary looked at him, warmth flooding her heart. They had forged a bond through this journey, an understanding, a promise. In that chaotic whirlwind of nature, he had become a protector, a source of strength. As the storm raged outside, sounding like a mighty beast, inside the cabin, they created their own sanctuary. They shared stories, laughter cutting through the darkness, offering comfort and hope. David grinned, eyes glimmering with mischief. Lucy's eyes widened, a flicker of excitement igniting in her gaze. Mary laughed gently, watching as David animatedly recounted his tale, bravado and laughter weaving around them like a warm embrace. That was the magic of storytelling. It turned fear into adventure, the storm outside into something they could all share. Hours passed as the storm continued its furious dance, but inside they created a bubble of warmth. Mary found solace in the flickering light, the rhythmic sound of rain, and the comfort of shared experiences. Just as they settled into their newfound routine, a sudden crack echoed outside, louder than before, making Lucy jump. She asked, wide-eyed. "It's just the storm," David reassured her, looking through the window. Mary felt a shiver run down her spine, but kept her voice steady. "She's right, Lucy." As the night wore on and the storm seemed to unleash its fury, they cuddled closer together, warmth stemming from their shared strength, a bond that held them all tightly against the chaos. Outside, the world was in disarray, but inside, love and hope flourished. It was becoming clear that together they could face anything. Mary thought of the journey ahead, the road they had yet to travel, but they wouldn't do it alone. As the storm began to quiet, whispers of dawn hinting through the clouds, Mary knew one thing for certain. The storm had been fierce, but it had also brought them together in ways they had never expected. United, they would ride through the tempest and emerge stronger on the other side together, bound by the triumph over adversity and a heart full of hope. The journey was far from over, and though the road would surely be challenging, they were ready to face it hand in hand, heart to heart, as one brave family. The storm hit like a monster awakening from a deep slumber. One moment Mary was comfortable in her wagon, driving along the familiar trail with her daughter Lucy by her side. The sun bathed the land in golden light, creating a serene atmosphere that made the journey feel nothing short of magical. But as the dark clouds rolled in, transforming the day from bright to bleak in an instant, Mary's heart sank. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, making Lucy jump. "Mama, I don't like the sound of that," she said, her voice tight with worry. "It's just a little thunder, sweet pea," Mary replied, trying to soothe her. But deep down, she felt a tightening in her stomach. The wind began to whip around them, bending the trees like they were made of grass. Then it happened. Without warning, a powerful gust of wind slammed into the wagon, forcing it off balance. Mary gasped as the wheels started to slip in the muddy ground. She fought to regain control, her hands tightening around the reins. She shouted, panic rising in her chest, but the storm had its own plans. The wagon tipped dangerously to one side, and before she could react, it broke free, careening down the steep slope. Mary screamed, desperation clawing at her throat. The wagon was everything to them, filled with belongings, memories, and the promise of a new life. Just then she saw him. David, the rugged traveler who had been walking alongside them, took off on horseback. Mary, he shouted, his voice resolute. His horse charged down the hill, and the sight of him ignited a flicker of hope. Please, Mary begged silently, watching as the wagon bounced over rocks and roots, gaining speed. Her heart raced as David galloped faster, bringing his horse closer. With each beat, the storm grew louder, thrashing against the earth, but where fear used to exist, hope emerged anew. David's face was set, eyes glued to the wagon as it veered dangerously close to the edge. He yelled, determination radiating from him. Mary could hardly breathe, her thoughts consumed by Lucy's safety. Mary called back, scanning the ground around them, please let him get there in time. As the wagon careened toward a drop, David urged his horse forward with an urgency that made Mary's heart skip. He shouted, Lucy replied, quivering with fear. Mary felt her own heart ice over. They could lose everything in a blink of life they fought so hard to build. But David wouldn't let that happen. In a swift and powerful move, he leapt off his horse, racing toward the wagon as it began to slide. Grab the rope, he ordered, pointing as he dashed to the side. Mary's mind spun. She barely registered what was happening, but adrenaline fueled her actions. Grabbing the frayed rope that hung from the wagon, she fumbled to secure it, hands shaking. On my count, 1, 2, David commanded, and together they pulled, their combined strength battling against the storm. The wagon groaned, but it shifted back towards safety. Mary cried out, channeling every ounce of energy she had left. And with one final tug, they managed to drag the wagon back onto the path, wheels thudding back to solid ground. Breathless, she glanced at David, relief washing over her like a warm wave. She gasped, a tear of joy escaping her eye. But just when they thought they were safe, the wind howled louder than ever, as if the storm was furious at their defiance. David shouted, urgency igniting his words. Mary reached for her daughter, who was still clinging to the side of the wagon, wide-eyed and trembling. With Lucy safely between them, David and Mary pressed forward, navigating the treacherous trail muddy and slick. Each gust of wind felt like a warning, the trees bending in submission. As they climbed, the sky thundered angrily above. We're going to be okay, David said, glancing back at them with fierce confidence. But as they reached a ridge, the storm unleashed its fury. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape for just a second, revealing the chaos all around them. Mary tightened her grip on Lucy's hand. She urged, heart pounding. Without warning, a sharp crack echoed nearby, a massive branch falling just feet away. The ground shook beneath them, and Lucy squeaked, stumbling back. Mary shouted, her heart racing as she caught her before she fell. Everything's all right, baby, I'm here. David knelt beside them, looking into Lucy's wide eyes. You're strong, kiddo, remember, just hold your mama's hand. His voice, though calm, held the weight of urgency, and Mary felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. The wind screamed, but they pressed forward. Up ahead, Mary spotted a cabin in the distance, worn and weathered, but somehow standing strong against nature's fury. She pointed, exhilaration bubbling inside her. David shouted, leading the charge. They sprinted toward the cabin, rain lashing down, soaking them as they dashed forward. The door creaked ominously as David swung it open, and they tumbled inside, breathless and alive. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of wood and old memories. Dark shadows danced across the walls as lightning flashed outside. They locked the door behind them, panting and soaked to the bone. Thank God, Mary breathed, trembling with relief. Lucy huddled close, her small frame finally relaxing in the cozy warmth of the cabin. We should find some supplies, David said, scanning the room while lighting a lantern. Mary nodded, her heart pounding less with fear and more with relief. While the storm still raged outside, they were safe for now. She moved to the rickety table, glancing around the cabin, searching for anything helpful. In a corner sat a dusty old chest, the wood faded but sturdy. She called, pulling it open. Inside lay old blankets and some preserved food. There's enough for a few days. Good. We don't know how long this storm will last, David replied, his focus unwavering. He moved to check the windows, securing them against the wind. They settled into a routine, moving around the cabin with an unspoken understanding of the urgency that lingered in the air. They needed each other. Mary glanced at Lucy, who was trying to stifle tears. Mary said suddenly, her voice warm and playful, "Do you see those old blankets?" Lucy's eyes widened with interest as she took a deep breath, the fear still lingering but fading bit by bit. She asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Absolutely, it'll be our secret fort against the storm," Mary said, lighting up with joy. They gathered the blankets, building a small makeshift fort in a cozy corner, laughter bubbling as they draped the fabric overhead. Even David couldn't help but chuckle, the tension from earlier easing just a bit. "I'll be the guard," David declared dramatically, taking a seat just outside their little haven. Lucy giggled, and Mary felt a warmth wrap around her heart. Despite the storm outside, inside it felt like they had forged something strong like a family, a partnership fortified by trials. As they settled into their fort, the sound of the storm began to fade, melding into something softer, the patter of rain against the roof, the distant rumble of thunder more like a lullaby now. Mary shared stories from her childhood, tales of adventure and bravery, and Lucy listened wide-eyed, laughter mixing with the gentle sounds of the storm. And in moments like these, Mary thought about how storms could reveal so much more than just chaos. They dug deeper, uncovered the fibers of their resilience. Each gust that battered the cabin walls felt like a challenge thrown at them, but together they fought back. Hours passed and the storm gradually began to lose its fury, the wind calming, the rain lessening to a light drizzle. The cabin creaked softly as they sat together in their fort, the warmth of companionship wrapping around them like a blanket. Eventually, Lucy yawned, her energy fading. She murmured, fighting off sleep. Mary smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "We'll always keep this place in our hearts, Lucy. It's our safe haven." David leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident in his posture, but a smile still lingering on his lips. "You two make quite the team. I'd follow you into any storm," he said, sincerity shining in his eyes. As Mary watched Lucy drift off to sleep, her heart filled with warmth. "We all are a team. We've faced so much already," she replied softly, feeling grateful for David, his courage and unwavering spirit. The clock ticked softly as they settled into this fragile peace, embraced by the sound of the storm retreating outside. Eventually, the clouds would part and the sun would shine again. They knew their journey wasn't over, but the storm had made them stronger, more united in their resolve. When the dawn finally broke, light filtered through the cabin's windows, illuminating everything with a golden glow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp freshness in the air. It felt like a rebirth, a renewed promise. Mary glanced outside, breathless as she saw the aftermath, a world washed clean, reborn. And beside her, David and Lucy stood, sharing in that moment of renewed promise. David asked, turning to Mary, his eyes filled with resolute spirit. "Ready," she replied, her heart swelling with certainty. As they stepped outside, taking in the beauty of a world refreshed by rain, she knew that whatever lay ahead, they would continue forward together, hand in hand, ready to face the next adventure, bound by the storm that had brought them closer than ever before. The wind howled like a beast unleashed, shaking the trees and rattling the very bones of the earth. Mary stood frozen, heart pounding in her chest as she grappled with a sudden fear. Just moments ago, she had been driving her wagon along the sunlit trail, laughing with her daughter Lucy as they sang songs of adventure. But now, the sky morphed into an ominous gray, swirling clouds promising chaos. Crack of thunder that split the air, the first raindrops fell, hitting the dusty ground and rapidly turning it to mud. Mary yanked the reins, her heart racing. She shouted, wrapping her arm around her little girl, trying to shield her from what lay ahead, but nature roared back. A violent gust of wind surged through the trees, slamming against the wagon with all its might. Mary gasped as the wheels lost their grip, sinking into the mud with a sickening lurch. "No," she screamed, panic flooding her voice. Just as she felt the world shifting around her, the wagon tilted precariously. She looked back at Lucy, whose wide eyes mirrored her own terror. Lucy cried, gripping the side of the wagon, her small fingers white with fear. Mary shouted, desperation clawing at her throat. Just then Mary spotted David, a fellow traveler, watching from his horse. He had joined their small caravan a few weeks back, sharing stories and laughter around the campfire. His demeanor was calm, but Mary could see the determination etched into his face. He yelled over the wind, kicking his horse into motion. "I'll get it." Before Mary could respond, the wagon lurched again, rolling down a slope. She sprinted after it, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She muttered, racing forward, but the storm was too powerful. The wagon spun wildly, heading straight for the edge of a ravine. David raced toward it, his horse's hooves pounding the ground like a war drum. He shouted as he reached the side of the wagon, motioning frantically. Mary's hands shook as she reached for the frayed line trailing from the wagon. She called, glancing back just for a second to see her daughter still crouched inside, fear etched on her face. "Hold on, baby," David shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. As they pulled together, the wagon groaned and shifted, but it felt like fighting against a hurricane. Mary's heart raced, desperation flooding her as she gritted her teeth. "Pull." She cried, summoning every ounce of strength. With a final heave, the wagon lurched back onto the path, wheels splashing in the mud. A wave of relief washed over Mary, but the storm still raged, winds howling like a furious spirit. Just then, a deafening crack of lightning illuminated the sky, a stark reminder that they were still in danger. David shouted, urgency coating his words. Mary nodded, adrenaline reviving her as she motioned for Lucy to get out of the wagon. "Come on, honey," she said, her voice firm yet comforting. Together they moved, their feet slipping in the mud as the storm clawed at their backs. As they forged ahead, Mary could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. The trees bent double in the wind and branches snapped like dry twigs. Each step uphill felt monumental, every gust battering against her resolve. But David moved with assurance, guiding them while keeping a watchful eye on the treacherous trail. "Let's go," he called out, pushing them forward. Mary could sense the urgency in his voice, the determination that radiated from him like a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Then they reached a clearing. Mary's breath caught as she spotted a small cabin perched against the hillside, weathered but standing strong against the storm. She shouted, her heart racing with a renewed sense of hope. David urged, leading the way. With Lucy nestled between them, they charged toward the cabin, rain soaking them to the bone. Mary's heart was a drumbeat of urgency as they reached the door, slamming it shut behind them just as another gust rattled the frame. Inside, the cabin felt like a sanctuary, a refuge from the storm's fury. Mary took a moment to catch her breath, heart racing. The place was dimly lit, with wooden beams that smelled of pine and earth. A fire lay cold in the hearth, but it had the potential to be a warm haven if they could get it going. David instructed, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Mary nodded, her instincts kicking in as her eyes darted around, searching for supplies. She caught sight of some old blankets piled in the corner and rushed over, pulling them out. She called, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. They might not be out of the storm yet, but at least they could find comfort. David joined her, rummaging through the cabin. "I'll see if there's any food," he said, his voice steady. As Mary wrapped the warm blanket around Lucy, feeling the little body shivering against hers, she fought back the rush of fear that threatened to consume her. "I'm here, baby. We're safe now," she whispered, kissing the top of Lucy's head. The cabin creaked, the wind howling outside like a pack of wolves. But even in the madness, a strange calm settled over Mary. They had made it this far, and with David by their side, she felt a flicker of hope. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as they secured the cabin against the storm. The fire lit up the small space, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Mary felt a sudden warmth in her chest, realizing that this was not just a refuge from the storm, but a sanctuary of togetherness. David returned with a few cans of preserved food he had found. "This will hold us for a while," he said, a sense of relief washing over his features. Mary smiled, grateful for his resourcefulness. As they settled down to share the food, Mary watched Lucy's face relax, the fear ebbing away. They set up a small area in the corner, making a cozy little nook with blankets where Lucy could curl up, feeling the warmth wash over her. With the storm still raging outside, they began to share stories, memories of laughter and adventure, tales from their journeys. It was as if they were weaving a tapestry of resilience together, each thread strong enough to hold them against the chaos outside. The storm's roar faded into the background, replaced by the soft sounds of family, their smiles illuminating the shrouded corners of the cabin. Each story they shared felt like another barrier erected against the darkness outside. As the hours passed, Mary found herself lost in the warmth of newfound companionship. She often glanced at David, who exuded a calm strength, a pillar of support. It reminded her of how important it was to have someone to lean on through turbulent times. Lucy asked, her voice small but filled with hope. "I hope so, sweetheart," Mary replied softly. David leaned in closer, nodding in agreement. "The storm will pass, it always does, and when it does, we'll have our stories to tell." Just then, a loud crack sounded outside, making Lucy jump. Mary instinctively wrapped her arms around her daughter, who pressed against her side. "It's okay," she reassured, her voice steady, "just thunder." David stood up, moving to the window to peer outside. "Let's make sure the cabin holds." Mary watched him, impressed by his vigilance. "You're always thinking ahead," she said, feeling a sense of admiration for him grow. "Someone has to keep an eye out," he replied with a half-smile, though his expression turned serious as he focused on the storm. Suddenly, the rain began to slow, transforming from a torrential downpour to a light drizzle. Hope lingered in the air, thickening with possibility. Mary felt it, and so did Lucy, who peeked out cautiously. She exclaimed, her face lighting up with excitement. David returned to their little nook, kneeling down beside Lucy. "It looks like the storm is calming down," he said gently, a smile breaking through his earlier seriousness. But just then, the branch of a tree cracked loudly against the cabin's roof. Lucy flinched, her small frame trembling again. She gasped, pressing closer to Mary. Mary's heart raced, torn between wanting to comfort her daughter and the need to remain composed. "It's all right, Lucy, just some branches. The cabin is still strong," she reassured, weaving her fingers through her daughter's hair. The storm continued to rumble outside, but gradually it grew softer, like a tired animal finally settling down. The air felt different in that moment, clearer and filled with the scent of fresh rain. Finally, as the clouds began to break apart, sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden beams across the cabin. The shadows lifted, revealing worn wooden floors and the cozy nest they had made. David stood up, moving toward the door slowly. "Let's step outside," he said, a new light in his eyes. Mary nodded, holding Lucy's hand tightly as they approached the door together. With a deep breath, David turned the handle and swung the door open, revealing a transformed world, a landscape washed clean, glimmering in the soft light of a renewed day. The storm had shifted, the chaos outside giving way to a calm that felt almost surreal. Mary felt a rush of gratitude wash over her as they stepped outside, taking in the beauty of a world reborn. The trees stood proud, droplets glistening like diamonds on their leaves. Lucy squealed, eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," Mary murmured, her heart swelling with joy. David surveyed the landscape, satisfaction reflected in his gaze. "We made it," he said, the weight of the storm finally lifting. As they stood side by side, taking in the breathtaking beauty, Mary realized just how powerful their shared journey had been. They had faced the storm, endured its wrath, and emerged stronger. With Lucy smiling brightly between them, Mary knew that this was just the beginning. They were a team forged by trials and triumphs, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Hand in hand, they walked forward into the light, taking those first steps into a bright new future together. The storm had come and gone, but the bond they had created would last forever. The sky darkened in an instant, as if a curtain had been drawn across the sun. The winds picked up, howling like a creature of the wild, and Mary's heart sank when she caught sight of the turbulent clouds rolling in. She was driving her wagon along the trail with her young daughter, Lucy, nestled comfortably inside, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the horizon. A sharp crack of thunder echoed through the valley, deep and resonant, shaking Mary to her core. She yelled, urgency slicing through her panic. But the storm was faster than they were. The wind roared, lifting the edge of the wagon's canopy, and the first fat drops of rain splattered down. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion, yet it was all so fast. Just as Mary regained control of the reins, a massive gust struck, slamming against the side of the wagon. The wheels bucked and spun in the mud, feeling like they were about to flip right over. Mary gripped the reins tighter, sweat beading on her forehead. She shouted, but it was too late. The wagon lurched wildly, and with a sickening lurch, it broke free from the trail, the wheels sliding down the slippery slope. Mary felt her heart drop. No, panic engulfed her, and she lunged for her daughter, who was peeking out with wide eyes, confusion morphing into terror. Before she could grab Lucy's hand, she heard another voice. It was David, a fellow traveler who had been added to their small caravan weeks ago. He was always a source of strength, a calming presence against the chaos of the world. Now he was poised on his powerful horse, eyes fixed on the runaway wagon with fierce determination. Mary yelled, and without waiting for a response, she dashed after the wagon, mud splattering beneath her feet. He kicked his horse into action, riding down the slope after the wagon that was threatening to crash. He yelled, voice strong against the wind. The sight of him sparked a flicker of hope in Mary's chest as she sprinted behind. The wagon had picked up speed, careening wildly as it went. Mary felt her breath catching, fear intertwining with the desperate hope that David would reach it in time. David surged forward, determination radiating from him like a beacon. He shouted, urging his horse faster. Mary pressed forward, her heart racing, her legs burning as she fought the mud and rain, wholly focused on her daughter. David yelled, and as they drew nearer, Mary could barely think through the fear. She reached for the frayed line trailing from the outside of the wagon, her fingers trembling as she grasped it tightly. David commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. 1, 2, they pulled with all their might. The wagon groaned as if it were alive, but it refused to move. Desperation clawed at Mary's heart. She cried, pushing every ounce of strength into the rope, battling against nature's fury. With one final heave, they managed to shift the wagon back onto the path, its wheels finding their footing again with a thud that reverberated in her heart. Mary fell back, gasping for breath, her adrenaline surging. She exclaimed, relief washing over her, but the storm hadn't finished. The winds howled louder as if in anger at their defiance. "Mary," David shouted, urgency etched into his features. Mary nodded, grasping Lucy's hand tightly as she returned to the wagon. She urged as the rain began to fall heavily, drenching them in an instant. Lucy's voice trembled. "Follow me," David instructed, and they headed up the trail, the air swirling with rain and debris. Mary struggled to keep pace, anxiety tightening in her chest as she glanced back at the chaos surrounding them. Mary shouted over the howling winds, her heart pounding with every step they took against the wild storm. The gusts whipped around them, but they pressed forward, driven by a fierce resolve. As they climbed higher, the path twisted and turned, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The trees swayed violently, warning them of the danger that lay ahead. David led the way, navigating the treacherous terrain with purpose, never once looking back. Lucy asked, her voice small but determined. "We're almost there," Mary reassured her, squeezing her hand. "No storm can take us down." As they continued, another bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the chaos for a brief moment. It felt like the world was breaking apart around them. The wind screeched, and then without warning, a nearby tree cracked in half, crashing to the ground just a few feet away. David called, pushing forward, urgency filling his voice. Mary pulled Lucy closer, feeling the weight of uncertainty. They couldn't afford to lose each other. The storm had already tried to take so much. Finally, they crested a ridge and spotted a small cabin nestled against the hillside. It was old and weathered, but it stood strong against the storm, a fragile sanctuary in the middle of chaos. David pointed, hope ignited in his voice. Mary shouted, pushing herself forward, heart racing as they ran toward the door. Rain lashed against them, soaking them through, but they didn't care. With each step, they felt the weight of the world lifting. David flung the cabin door open and they tumbled inside just as another branch thundered against the wall outside. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. Suddenly, the sounds of the storm dulled to a distant roar, leaving behind the crackling of the fire that flickered in the hearth. Breathless, Mary took a moment to gather herself, taking in the sight of the cramped but cozy space. There were wooden beams above, a table with mismatched chairs, and a few blankets draped over the back. The smell of wet wood filled the air, but it felt safe like a new beginning. "We need to check for supplies," David urged, moving swiftly through the cabin. Mary nodded, her heart still racing but steadied by their temporary sanctuary. She moved to a corner, discovering a small stack of old blankets and some canned goods. She called out, "And food too." David replied, glancing at Lucy, whose eyes were wide with both fear and excitement. "We're going to be all right, Lucy." Mary wrapped the blankets around both Lucy and herself, feeling the warmth seep in. "You did so well, honey. I'm so proud of you," she whispered, kissing Lucy's forehead. As they settled in, the cabin creaked under the weight of the storm outside, but the fire crackled gently, wrapping them in its warmth. It felt surreal to be in this small space, safeguarded from the fury just beyond the walls. Lucy chirped, her voice easing as she nestled deeper into the blankets. Mary smiled, feeling a surge of affection. "All right, sweetheart." Lucy's eyes lit up with interest, and even David leaned in closer, captivated. Mary spun a tale of courage and triumph, letting the story flow with each word. As she spoke, the storm outside continued its wrath, but inside the cabin they created their own world, a bubble of warmth in the midst of chaos. The energy shifted, and laughter trickled in as Lucy chimed in with her thoughts, filling the tiny cabin with magic. Time seemed to flow differently in their little sanctuary, the storm's chaos transforming into a gentle rhythm. They shared memories and dreams, weaving a connection stronger than any storm could shatter. Lucy asked, looking at Mary with wide eyes. Mary paused, glancing at David for reassurance. "It will, sweetheart. Just like all storms, this one will pass too," she replied, determination lacing her voice. The fire crackled softly as they settled into a comfortable silence, the sounds of the storm now a soothing melody in the background. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a lull enveloped the cabin. The rain had diminished and the thunder rolled away into the distance. Mary listened, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "Let's check outside," David said, standing up and making his way to the door. Mary exchanged a glance with Lucy, who nodded slowly. With a deep breath, they followed David outside, stepping into a world washed clean by the storm. The trees stood tall, droplets hanging from their leaves like jewels in the early light. The sky had turned a brilliant blue, with the sun peeking through clouds like a blessing descending from above. Mary felt her heart lift as they stepped outside, taking in the breathtaking beauty surrounding them. The storm had transformed the landscape into a work of art, a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of resilience. Lucy squealed, jumping up and down, her fear completely forgotten. Mary laughed, relief flooding her as she watched the joy on her daughter's face. She responded, glancing at David, who stood beside her, eyes soft with warmth. "It's a new day," he said softly, and Mary nodded in agreement, their hearts beating as one. As the three of them stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the storm, Mary realized that this journey had brought them closer together. They had faced nature's fury and emerged stronger, united by the struggles they had overcome. David asked, looking at both of them with that familiar glint of determination in his eyes. Mary smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. "Ready," she replied, knowing their journey was far from over. Together they would ride into whatever lay ahead, their spirits unbroken, emboldened by the storm that had tested them. With Lucy's hand in one and David's in the other, they moved forward, ready for the adventures to come, ready to embrace the beautiful chaos of life together. The first roar of thunder echoed like a beast awakening. Mary jolted upright, her heart racing as black clouds rolled in the horizon. Just moments ago, she had been driving her wagon along the treeline trail, with her daughter Lucy happily singing to herself in the back. Now the sky had transformed into a chaotic swirl, dark and ominous, and a gust of wind whipped through the trees, sending a shiver down her spine. Lucy's small voice pierced through the cacophony. Mary shouted back, gripping the reins with white-knuckled determination. She could feel the wagon sway beneath her as another crack of thunder sliced the air, causing her to wince. The sight of Lucy in the back tugged at her heart. The little girl had always been so brave, but even the bravest could feel fear. Suddenly, the wind escalated, slamming into the wagon with a force that made Mary gasp. She cried out as the wheels began to slip and slide in the mud. She could already sense that the storm was gaining strength, swirling around them like a living thing. Within seconds it happened. A sharp gust of wind struck, pushing the wagon sideways. Mary fought to regain control, but her efforts were futile. With a sickening sound, the wagon tipped dangerously to one side, and before Mary could react, it broke free from the path. She screamed, adrenaline surging through her body. She turned just in time to see it careening down a hill, out of control. Panic gripped her heart as she watched her daughter, wide-eyed and trembling. In that moment, she saw him, David, a fellow traveler, riding up on his horse, face set with grim determination. He shouted over the howling wind, urgency echoing in his voice. Mary's heart raced. Would he reach it in time? She sprinted after the wagon, her legs pumping hard against the slick ground. She pleaded silently, desperation clawing at her throat. David kicked his horse into a gallop, his eyes locking onto the runaway wagon as it careened down the slope, wheels spinning and teetering on the edge of disaster. He yelled, his voice roaring above the chaos. As Mary ran, everything around her turned into a blur. She could see the wagon pitching forward, losing its grip on the trail. A surge of panic flooded her veins, propelling her toward the edge of the hill. "David," she screamed, her throat raw. With every ounce of strength, David urged his horse closer, a determined look fixed on his face. He called and Mary scrambled forward, grasping the frayed line hanging from the wagon's side. Her hands shook as she wrapped the rope around her small frame while David maneuvered his horse alongside the wagon. He shouted, voice steady despite the storm. They pulled together, grappling with the stubborn wagon, but it seemed like an impossible fight against the wind. Mary could feel it slipping away, hear the crack of thunder rumble as if the skies were mocking them. She grunted, putting her weight into the rope. It felt as if the storm itself was jealous of their determination. With one final surge of will, they yanked the wagon back up onto the path. It thudded back into place, but not without consequence. The storm howled, furious that they had escaped its grasp. David shouted, urgency radiating from him as he glanced around for more danger. Mary nodded, gathering Lucy up in her arms. She said, her heart pounding as they plunged down the path. The wind howled louder, branches snapping and swirling like a wild dance above them. They pressed forward, hearts pounding as they ducked under branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Lucy cried, clinging to Mary's neck, her eyes wide with fear. Mary urged, determination coursing through her. David guided them up the trail, his horse moving with sure-footed agility even as the winds battered down. Each crack of thunder felt like a battle cry. Each flash of lightning illuminated the treacherous landscape. David pointed to a jagged rock formation just ahead. It could provide some shelter from the storm. With their spirits rallying against the tempest, they dashed toward the rocky outcropping, adrenaline serving as their armor. Mary felt each heartbeat echoing in her ears as they reached the cover. David swung off his horse, tying it to a nearby tree before turning back to help them. He asked Lucy, his eyes softening as he crouched down to her level. I'm scared, Lucy whispered, her small voice trembling in the storm. Mary knelt beside her, pulling her close. I know, sweetie. She looked at David, feeling grateful for his presence. You're brave, Lucy. As the storm raged, Mary noticed how David took charge, making quick work of securing their shelter to ensure it would hold against the wind. He wasn't just fighting the storm, he was fighting for them. Crack, a branch crashed down nearby, jolting them from their thoughts. David instructed, urgency threading through his voice. They settled into the small space, huddling together as the rain lashed against the rock. The sound was deafening, a waterfall of chaos, but in that moment they were a team braving the storm together. Tell me a story, Mama, Lucy said, her voice small yet steady. Okay, Mary replied, trying to push through her own fear. As she spun the tale, Mary felt David listening with rapt attention, his expression softening. The storm outside became a distant memory. With each word, she wove a world of heroism and hope, allowing Lucy to slip away from the fear clinging to them. But even amidst the tale, the winds howled louder, the storm relentless. Suddenly, another crack of lightning illuminated the sky, revealing how close they were to the edge of chaos. Mary felt a shiver run down her spine as the cabin swayed, shaking under the storm's weight. Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper, fear creeping back in. It has to, Mary replied, determination flooding through her. Every storm passes. And then in that fragile moment, all three of them breathed together, a ripple of hope amidst the noise of chaos. David suggested, scanning the area for any glimmer of light. Mary glanced out from their shelter, seeing the trees whipping wildly. The storm was still angry, but up ahead, a break in the clouds that showed a hint of brightness in the sky. She pointed, relief flooding her veins. Just as they gathered their footing, a powerful gust punched through, knocking the fragile rocks they had sheltered behind. David warned, stepping protectively in front of Mary and Lucy, but they didn't have time to react. The wind surged again and the rocks above them began to crumble, a loud crash deafening as it fell. David shouted, urgency snapping them into action. Mary grabbed Lucy's hand, pulling her close as they bolted from their hiding place, hearts pounding in their chests. As they sprinted away, the ground trembled under them, the storm still raging with no mercy. David yelled, looking back. The weight of debris fell behind them like thunder, but they pushed forward, navigating through the chaos. The world around them was darkening again, shadows stretching. Lightning flashed once more, and in that instant, Mary caught a glimpse of a path just off to the side, leading upward toward what looked like a glimmer of hope. She shouted, pulling Lucy with her. They veered toward the path as David followed closely behind, adrenaline fueling their flight. But as they reached the edge of the path, Mary felt something tug at her heart. Was this the right way? Would they find shelter? The question lingered in her mind as they scrambled forward, fear mixing with determination. Just as they turned to climb the rocky path, the world erupted again. A deafening roar echoed through the valley as a massive crack split the sky, and then it happened. Out of nowhere, a tree came crashing down right in front of them, blocking the path. Mary's breath caught in her throat. "No," she cried, scrambling back, pulling Lucy close as David stared at the fallen tree, disbelief etched on his face. David shouted, panic in his voice as he scanned around for another way, heart racing against the clock. They had nowhere to go. The storm still reached out like a vicious claw, ready to snatch them away in an instant. The weight of fear pressed down harder than ever. "Think," David urged, looking at Mary with a fierce determination. "We can climb." With adrenaline coursing through her, Mary took a deep breath and nodded. "We can't let this stop us," she said, squeezing Lucy's hand tightly. Just as they turned to look for a safe route, the sky seemed to crack open again, and Mary's heart raced. As the thunder crashed and lightning illuminated the chaos around them, they had to make a choice, and fast. David shouted, eyes blazing with determination. And in that moment, as the storm raged on, they plunged into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead, united by hope and the fierce will to survive. The world around them blurred, every heartbeat echoing their resolve as they prepared to leap into the darkness that awaited them.